computer. So you should be seeing little recording notes on your screen. If you'll hit those, you can still hear me talk if you don't like them. So once again, hi, my name is April Anderson-Zorn. I am the University Archivist at Illinois State University. Some of you know it as Illinois State Normal University, and don't worry, we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. I'm here tonight to talk to you about the university and its involvement in the Civil War. Of course, you know, I want to emphasize here that this is not a presentation about the Civil War necessarily as much as how the Civil War played into the development of our institution and how many of our prominent members and students of the university interacted with events of the war. But really, before I kick into this, I just want to let you know that we're the University Archives. I represent the University Archives for Illinois State University. My official name of the repository is the Dr. Joanne Rayfield Archives. Dr. Joanne Rayfield is my predecessor. She's still around, still kicking. She's over in Georgia, actually, lives in Georgia right now. She was the one who recognized the importance of the documents that needed to be collected. And I could go on and on about her influence and why the archives exist, thanks in large part to her. And then I was brought in 2011, again, from the sunny state of Florida, to come in and make sense, if you will, of the repository. She even admits it too, to make sense of it, to make it accessible for researchers to come in and research our materials and to preserve those materials for folks who want to access them. So if you're not really familiar with ISU history, I'm also kind of coming at this presentation for folks who maybe don't have a robust sense, we'll call it a robust sense of ISU history or knowledge of it. I am part of the university library, which is called Milner Library. So Milner Library on the campus of Illinois State. Please do not go to Illinois State University's campus and go into Milner Library and try to find me, because I do not reside in Milner Library. Milner Library is actually, it's as robust and as large as that building is. We're too big to fit in Milner Library. So I'm in a warehouse, literally. I was just talking to Sarah about this prior to us coming in here. I'm in a warehouse 3 miles north of campus. I have over 17,000 cubic feet of material. So we have a lot of material that we want to organize, protect, preserve, and make accessible to our researchers. So that's who we are. How does this material and how have I used this material to kind of come to you tonight with this? Oh, I'm having a little bit of a technological, hold on one second. It's being, that's all right. I'll make that work. You should be able to see the screen anyway. So I use this information to come to you tonight to talk a little bit about our history and how we play into some of these significant events within United States history. So again, I kind of want to set the stage, especially for those of you who maybe aren't aware of ISU history and where we come from and how we got here and why we're in Bloomington. We were founded in 1857. We were the first publicly funded institution in the state of Illinois. We were founded by a gentleman named Jesse Fell. Jesse Fell, who himself was an abolitionist. Jesse Fell, I know if you don't know Illinois state history, that's okay. If you're from the area, you know Jesse Fell. And Jesse Fell was involved in so many foundings and creations in the state of Illinois, you know, founding of Pontiac. I mean, even the Pantograph and ISNU at the time. He was deeply involved in the creation of many of the things that we know and love today here in Illinois. I'm also going to mention Charles Hovey. So Charles Edward Hovey was our first president of the institution. Then called principal, so like a school principal, but he was, for all intents and purposes, the first president of the institution. Again, we were founded by largely abolitionists. Jesse Fell himself, probably one of the largest of the group, abolitionists, with the idea that we were here to train everyone who wanted to learn how to teach. This was not, you were not going to be turned away for the color of your skin. And he very much believed in this principle and this idea when the university was founded. So I also, while I said, you know, this isn't a history lesson about the Civil War, I also want to call to your attention just a few of the things that are happening nationally that do start to play into the history of Illinois State. So For example, Jesse Fell, I'm an employee of Illinois State. I am its university archivist. I will always tout the relationship between Jesse Fell and Abraham Lincoln. And I've certainly had people come to me and say, well, David Davis and Abraham Lincoln. I know we all have our favorites in history. I fervently believe that if it weren't for Jesse Fell and Abraham Lincoln's friendship, that formed in the 1830s in Vandalia, when Vandalia was the capital of Illinois, and they were paired together as roommates, which I love to tell that story because they're like two students getting paired into a dormitory, and that they make a long lasting friendship. If it weren't for that relationship, we may never have had Lincoln as a president, frankly. But Jesse Fell was very instrumental, one of the instrumental individuals to get Lincoln to run for president and put him on that national stage. So he becomes president in 1860. Also, too, I should mention, he's president in 1860. We're founded in 1857. Lincoln was still doing lawyer work. He was still helping Jesse Fell, in particular when Jesse was founding the institution. He needed someone to come in and create the legalese for the bond documents that people were going to sign to dedicate money to bringing the institution to Bloomington. And Lincoln, he said sure, and he drew up those documents. So don't come running to me thinking you're going to see Lincoln signatures. I don't have signatures from Lincoln. This is strictly legalese documentation saying, John Smith's going to donate this much money to the cause of bringing Illinois State Normal University to Bloomington. Of course, the formation of the Confederate States of America in February of 1861. I'm mentioning this because we're going to be seeing these dates again, and what some of our principal players that we're talking about tonight were doing around these timeframes. In particular, too, the formation of the Confederate States of America right around that time, largely, by and large, people in really here in the area and the United States, they didn't really think this was going to be a thing. They largely thought this was just going to be a few skirmishes, maybe last a year, and it would blow over. So when we start to see the formation of the Confederate States of America and really those early battles, particularly the Battle of Fort Sumter, and when we get to First Battle of Bull Run, there still was this sort of lackadaisical thinking about it that it's not going to be a thing. Hovey, however, had reasons to believe that this was going to be a thing. And we'll talk a bit about the First Battle of Bull Run because Jesse Fell and Charles Hovey were both at the First Battle of Bull Run in July of 1861. So, who I should say was, I always make this mistake. I think of many of our long deceased faculty and presidents and as they're still alive, because I talk to them. I'm kind of like Ducky from NCIS. I talk to a lot of our characters in the archives all the time. I talk to Ange Milner in the archives all the time. Who is Charles Hovey? Charles Edward Hovey was born in Thetford, Vermont in 1827, April 26th. He was a teenage teacher for all intents and purposes. He taught at Framingham High School in Massachusetts. And I know that some of you who maybe know some of our more recent Illinois State University history might go, Framingham, why does that sound familiar? A few presidents ago, we had a president who came from Framingham University in Massachusetts. So what I find really fascinating with this connection is that here we have our first president teaching at the high school in the area, where we would have a later president who admittedly didn't last very long here, who later came to be a president here. Framingham's also important because that institution was one of the first normal schools in the country. We were the 9th normal school to be founded in this country and the first to be founded to the west of the Appalachian Mountains. So it's just an interesting connection that he was doing some of this teenage teaching, if you will, in Framingham High School. Why was he doing it? He was able to go to school a lot longer than some of his contemporaries. And so where you had some farmhand children who maybe were getting the very basics of an education, elementary school education, he was able to go further. And when you get that kind of education, you're generally considered to be able to teach. And so that's what he did to earn money. He earns money and he goes to Dartmouth, which he graduated in 1852. And he married His alumni sweetheart, she also went to Dartmouth, Harriet Spofford. They married in 1854. If you're interested in Harriet Spofford as the wife of the first president, and I have a side hustle going right now. I want to focus on the spouses of our first presidents, or of our early presidents, and what were their lives like. You can see Harriet's papers at Dartmouth. They do have a collection of Harriet's papers there at Dartmouth. So they get married in 1854, and not long after they get married, they move to Peoria. While they're in Peoria in 1854, Charles Hovey becomes, first he starts as a principal of a boys' school. He then later becomes the superintendent of Peoria schools, and then eventually finds himself in the presidency, and that happens in a very quick succession. And again, this is something that we'll kind of touch on here in a little bit. And his rise to fame, if you will, to become the president of Illinois State Normal University at the time, and how fast that was. But something to note, one of his children became a famous poet, Richard Hovey, who was born in 1864, and it happened to be born around the time that his father was back home in Illinois, convalescing from wounds and illness that he had received during the Civil War. So Hovey's back here. I've recently gotten questions from just interested parties who contacted archives, just kind of cold contacted us and said, hey, that house that's on Main Street, if you're going north on Main Street, you go past the university, oh gosh, the road's totally escaping my mind right now, but the corner of U High, and then, think of U High on the left side, you go past that intersection, and just a little ways up, there's this really fancy looking house on the left. and I had so many people say, that's Hovey's house, right? Well, I'm here to tell you that was not Hovey's house. As I understand it, it was a farmer in town who owned that house originally and had that house built. The Hovey family lived at 202 West Mulberry Avenue. The house did stand for many, many years, but like most of the buildings around the university over time, it was demolished. If you go there now, you can go to that lot as it stands. Well, as the house doesn't stand, but the lot is still there. And there is a rock that marks the home site as the birthplace of Richard Hovey, his son, who was a very famous poet and unfortunately died when he was 30 years old. But he did become a very well-known and famous poet. Oh, maybe he wants to change for me. There we go. So let's kind of divert for 1 second. I want to talk about the normal school, what we were known as. So we were a normal school. So for those of you that don't know what a normal school is, it is a school that you go to learn how to teach. We were the 9th normal school founded in the United States. So 1857, first publicly funded institution of higher education in the state of Illinois. And what you're seeing on this sort of transitional page that I have for you is a map. It's actually a sort of plan. It never was enacted fully as you see here, but this was drawn up by a gentleman named William Saunders, who, as again, these connections that we're going to see in this presentation, he designed the cemetery, the Gettysburg Cemetery. He also was responsible for the landscape design for the cemetery just off of Irving Park Boulevard up in Chicago, where some of our more, Andrew Burnham, some of our more famous Chicago architects are buried. But he was friends with Jesse Fell, and Jesse Fell, in his infinite wisdom, asked William Saunders to draw up a plan for what he thought the quad would look like, and that's what you're seeing right there. The building that you see, I'm going to show you that in a little bit in fuller scale. That is Old Main. If some of you are alums of a certain era, you may have heard of Old Main or been very familiar with the dome, or if you're also of a certain era, maybe you took a class in Old Main. Old Main was the first and only building on this campus for a very long time. On our modern campus, if you've never been to campus, think of a long up and down rectangle. The very top of that rectangle, on each corner, you're going to have Schrader Hall, and you're going to have Felmley, and in the middle, approximately, is where Old Main used to stand. And there's a marker to it today on our campus. So just briefly, the founding of ISNU, and kind of delving a little deeper into that and what I mentioned before. So Hovey comes to Illinois from the East Coast, and he first comes because he's asked to come to be the principal. He didn't just take the job. He's asked to come to be the principal of a very high influencing boys' school, lots of money, lots of influence. Come be the principal of this boys' school. And so he came in he started roughly 1855. He moves in 1854, but he's primarily there in 1855. He makes such an impression on the local educating community, especially in his ability to administer education and groups of people that are teaching educational courses, that he was asked to be the superintendent of Peoria schools, or he found his way to being the superintendent of Peoria schools in 1856. So that's pretty fast, right? He's only in the state a year and maybe a year and a half, and this guy's already superintendent of Peoria schools. Well, he is also making friends in this work, and he's making highfalutin friends, one of which is Jesse Fell. He becomes familiar with Jesse Fell. And with the founding of the institution, Illinois State Normal University, in February of 1857, that founding documentation in February of 1857 also started the Board of Education of the state of Illinois, which was the catalyst by which they said, all right, well, we need to find a place to put the university now. We need to find a principal or a president for the university. And Jesse Fell said, hey, I know a guy, and it was Charles Hovey. So Charles Hovey was asked by the Board of Education of the state of Illinois later that year if he would become principal, of which he did accept. So just to kind of lay the groundwork here for what's Hovey doing when he is principal or president of a university. It's certainly a little bit what we're seeing today as a president, but he's doing a lot of the legwork to build the foundation, not just physically, but administratively. So Hovey has to go and find faculty. There are no faculty here. I mean, again, we're the first normal school to be founded on this side, on the west side of the mountains. He's got to go back east and convince people who largely had lovely, comfortable jobs teaching courses, pedagogy courses, teaching these courses at these established normal schools, to come to this ragtag little place in Illinois in the middle of the state and take a chance and become some charter faculty and start teaching at the university. So he's got to go convince people to come here and work here. He's also got to build a facility. He's got to build the main building. There was competition for where the school was going to go. Batavia, Washington, Peoria, these were places that were considered as locations for Illinois State Normal University, but Bloomington did win out for having the largest bid, for having the most folks come up with the most money to say, we're going to sponsor this institution to bring it here. So technically speaking, we always do Founders Day around this date. The school opened on February 18th, 1857, but really that's what got the wheels turning. We did have classes later that year, and we had classes, and you can see in this photo here, we had classes first in Majors Hall. Some of you, again, you Lincoln fans out there, will go, wait a minute, Lincoln's Lost Speech. Yes, that is the same building. The photo that you see here is actually from the Library of Congress. I'm happy to send you to the location. This is all online. If you'd ever curious to see what those building plans, original and later, of what this building was at one point, I'm happy to send you to that, the Library of Congress, through their National Historic Preservation. The building that you see here is only 2 stories. It was originally 3 stories. And from what I can tell and from what I've read, most of the activity for Illinois State Normal University took place largely on the 2nd and 3rd floor. They needed the space to have auditorium space, to have people sit and listen to educators. So the idea was, when they were in Majors Hall, they weren't going to be there for very long because they were building what we eventually would come to call colloquially Old Main. But they ended up staying there a little bit longer. I'll get to that in a second. Also too, so here's a man who's trying to get faculty and he's trying to build a building, but he's also teaching as well. And when you look at the catalogs, oftentimes next to his name, you're going to see him listed with things like, he's listed as the instructor in the history, science, and methods of education. Or he could also be listed as the person teaching theory and the art of teaching. So he's definitely sticking with this idea of pedagogy. What is pedagogy? How do you teach different subjects to different levels of different ages of students, et cetera? So he's teaching, he's recruiting, and he's also leading the construction of a facility. So here it is in all its glory for you Old Main fans. And I'll tell you what, I get lots of questions about Old Main. I could talk about Old Main all day. So here is the original building. This is one of the very few color photographs we have of Old Main, and I will point out the significance of that here in a minute. So the building did have a cornerstone laying ceremony on September 29th, 1857. They had a big ceremony. The cornerstone is laid, and they got to work on the construction of the building. They had already purchased most of the building material for the building, so it's out in the prairie. It's prairie for as far as the eye could see. However, by a little later that year, about a month or two later, we get the financial panic of 1857, and without getting into a lot of economics ease, if you will, just know that a lot of money went bye-bye and there was no money. Construction was halted. Investors pulled out of the project because they either didn't have the money or it scared them off. So within the Board of Education, that group that was formed by the bill in February of 1857, they formed a building committee. And the building committee, for the most part, their mantra was get Old Main built by all means necessary, and borderline money laundering, I think you could maybe say. I mean, there was definitely some questionable money changing hands to get this thing up. A lot of investors, or excuse me, a lot of board members and a lot of bond insurers, people who said, we're going to give you money to build this institution. There was debt to be paid off after the financial panic, so they used their own money to pay off a lot of the debt. A lot of labor and materials were accepted as payment where there was no money to be given to build the building. Hovey himself personally purchased $30,000 worth of what was referred to then as swampland. This is land that the federal government gave to the state of Illinois, who then gave to counties, roughly mid-1800s. So this quote unquote swampland where our campus now sits, Hovey purchased about $30,000 of that. That's roughly $1.1 million of land today. So I also, being the Disney nerd that I am, like to liken that to the secret land boom that was happening in Orlando when they were purchasing all that land and nobody knew who was buying it. It was kind of the same tactic. And this fuels a land boom in this area. So he maybe largely helped to start that land boom, but in reality, this was a man who was desperate to get this campus going and get this campus built. Also, if you remember, I mentioned the materials had been sitting out in the elements when all this started, when the building first was constructed in 1857. So that's about 2 years of this. It's not like you're going down to Lowe's and buying pressure treated lumber. This is raw wood that's sitting out in the elements for 2 years. And then that material was used to build basically the frame of Old Main. So the fact that that building stood for almost 100 years, it's amazing. It did have its, again, I could talk at length about Old Main. It did have its problems. It did maybe almost kill people a couple of times, but Old Main withstood the test of time for about a century. I want to point out the photo real quick. You'll notice in the photo, it's red and white. For all intents and purposes. For the 12 years that I've been here, I have been asked repeatedly, April, where did the school colors come from? And up until last year, I had not really had a lot of time to kind of dig into that question. Lots of other questions to answer. And so finally, I took the time to sit down and I went to some other texts, Helen Marshall, some of our history, previous history authors of the university's history. And it finally dawned on me, Hovey did this purposely. Hovey and early faculty purposely chose the brick that was red and the white facade to stand out on the prairie. And in large part, our university colors come from the look of Old Main. And this is the photo that I can use. Like I said, we don't have very many photos, so I like to get this out and show this to folks now. I also want you to keep this building in mind as we talk about how students were preparing for possible war, how they were very likely going to go to war. And in this, as the war is building up and the Confederate States of America and Fort Sumter, and we're seeing these increasing conflicts, students largely are getting nervous and they are preparing themselves to go to war, and they do it mainly out in front of Old Main. So again, this is my, we're not here to dissect the university history, or excuse me, we're here to dissect university history, but we're not here necessarily to talk about the intricacies of the Civil War. But Civil War, we are going to talk about little pieces and parts and how that ties into university history. So you're seeing here a badge from the Normal Rifles. The Normal Rifles were a group of students who, as the war is starting to take shape, and this is a group that grew increasingly. These were students who were students at Illinois State Normal University and who said, oh no, the war is going to happen. I want to do my duty and fight. Well, our 9th president, President Bone, actually wrote an article titled Organizing the Schoolmaster's Regiment. And in that article, in his research, he noted that as Hovey is watching the increasing size of these groups of students who eventually called themselves the Normal Rifles, marching with just wooden sticks, frankly, and pretending that those were the rifles, he thought, we had a lot of thoughts going on. He thought, oh goodness, these students, they're going to leave without getting their teaching certificate. And what are they going to do if they survive and they come back without this education that they had fought so hard to get? And then too, you know, they're not drilling correctly. They're going to die. So he hired a gentleman by the name of Captain John White. And at one point, he was drilling upwards of 55 men, and they would be with their wooden rifles. And here's a badge that they would wear. They called themselves the Normal Rifles, and they would march in front of Old Main to prepare themselves to go to war. It's also, I think, important to note the gentleman who is really considered sort of the first person from ISNU. He was one of the first several people, but we largely consider him sort of the first person from ISNU to sign up, if you will, to go to the war. His name was Joseph G. Howell. He was at the time the principal of the model school. So we are a normal institution, normal university. Just like we have model schools today with Metcalf and U High, we had a model school, just sort of an unnamed model school, where students who were learning how to teach would then go to that model school and practice how to teach with students from the area. Joseph Howell was the principal of that model school, and he was one of the first, like I said, to sign up in April of 1861. In fact, here's a picture of Joseph Howell right here that we have at University Archives. This is him in his uniform. So this is I love to tell this story because I've heard it many different ways. I've read about this story many different ways, and I liken it to sort of this this expanded sort of planes, trains, and automobiles, John Candy kind of film, right? Like here's two guys, and they took a long trip and they went to DC. It's become its own sort of legend, but there's a lot of truth still to this legend. So I do like to tell the story, and especially the dedication that Hovey had. I think you can see that shines through. So Hovey, like I said, was worried about the students who were training themselves to march, many of them who were just going to leave. They were going to leave the institution and not get their certificate and go off to war. So with Jesse Fell's help, and here's Jesse Fell again, with Jesse Fell's help, they went to DC, and really Hovey, his his main goal was to get a regiment. He thought, okay, if I can get these guys to wait long enough to graduate, we can sign up together. That's what we need to do to get them to graduate. So he goes with Fell, and they make it there just in time for the first Battle of Bull Run. And I'm sure you've heard this story, you know, college, maybe even when you're in elementary school, how the first Battle of Bull Run in DC, people were sitting on the sidelines having a picnic lunch because they thought, it's just going to be some pebbles thrown. And it turns out to be one of the bloodiest battles that occurred in the war. So as it starts to get out of control, Hovey sees this, and some accounts have him joining the fight. Of course, the Union side had him joining the fight, while Fell went to the medical tents and helped as the wounded are coming off the battlefield. Well, with this experience under him, Hovey then was able to go to the White House and ask and said, look, this obviously isn't going away, and my men are going to sign up. This is my concern. Whether he asked Edwin Stanton or Abraham Lincoln is still unclear. I don't know if he asked the Secretary of War or if he asked Lincoln himself. He would know Lincoln. They certainly would have met before through Fell. But he did successfully get the 33rd Illinois Volunteer Infantry Regiment, which was shortened to and known largely as the Teachers Regiment or the Normal Regiment. If you look this up, if you go into Civil War history, again, I'm not a Civil War history buff, but I do know that there is a secondary Teachers Regiment out of the East Coast that was, that regiment was often referred to, but generally speaking, in the history books, when you see people talking about the Teachers Regiment, or more specifically, the Normal Regiment, that's us. I also, since I have his photo up, I just want to note that Howell here, he was the first casualty. He was the first to sign up, and he was the first casualty of the war. He died at the Battle of Fort Donelson, and I'm just a couple blocks away. In fact, down the street behind me is Evergreen Cemetery, and if you go to the Civil War section toward the front of the cemetery, I believe it's in the front of the cemetery, you can find Howell's grave there. So just also too, I want to talk about Jesse Fell and his involvement with specifically the Civil War. And interestingly enough, he had an involvement, but he had an involvement and he was a pacifist. So how did he have an involvement if he was a pacifist? Well, you got to back that up into the 1830s in Vandalia when he met Abraham Lincoln. Again, I liken this to school buddies. They were paired up like bunkmates in a boarding house when they were lawyers in Vandalia. They have very similar interests, politics and railroad and law. So they became fast friends and remained fast friends. And through that friendship over the years, and as Jesse Fell made a name for himself and did all these foundings and all these, I'm going to make a town, I'm going to make a newspaper. He also encouraged Lincoln to write an autobiography for a newspaper back east for some folks that he knew that owned or ran a newspaper. And he says, hey, why don't you just write a short autobiography, let them know what you're about. I think you'd be a candidate for president, maybe do this. And Lincoln wasn't exactly thrilled at the prospect early on, but he agreed at the behest of his friend, and he did this. Jesse Fell is also largely credited for encouraging him to debate Stephen A. Douglas in the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858. So he definitely has this long-standing, until Lincoln's death, and certainly upheld his friendship with Lincoln past Lincoln's death, had a very deep connection and friendship with Lincoln. But Jesse Fell himself was actually born to Quaker parents in Pennsylvania. Jesse Fell moved to the Midwest, and as he's going along, as you're going along, I'm going to found a town here. I'm going to found a town here. He founded towns like Pontiac, Clinton, DeWitt County, again, the Pantograph, us, Illinois State. So he definitely had this penchant for this is a need, and I see a need, and I'm going to fill this need here. His religious beliefs in his upbringing as a Quaker with Quaker parents made him a pacifist. And so when he comes here, he didn't really stick with his Quaker roots. He instead founded the Free Congregational Church here in town, which is now the Unitarian Universalist Church. If you go in, I'm told there is a bust of Jesse Fell that sometimes people don't know is a bust of Jesse Fell, as I was told by one member of that church in a fun conversation several months ago. But these religious beliefs made him a pacifist. So when Lincoln said to him after the first Battle of Bull Run, will you please stay and help me? That's a big ask for someone like Jesse Fell to consider. And he did stay, and he stayed, and he was the Union Army paymaster for about 11 months. We have his epaulets that he wore on his uniform out at University Archives. But this is, I think, a testament to he had these deeply held beliefs, but because of his friendship with Lincoln, he did agree to stay. So the 33rd Illinois, I also kind of want to focus a little bit on the 33rd Illinois, because again, this is mostly made up of students and faculty from Illinois State Normal University, never mind Charles Hovey is their leader. But they did have some significant skirmishes during the war, which would ultimately lead to Hovey later in life, what he chose to do with his later life. So for you military buffs, Hovey was commissioned a colonel in August of 1861 when the regiment was launched, when the regiment got started. So he's given a colonel's commission, or his commissioned colonel rather, and then he's later appointed a brigadier general in 1862. But this didn't get through Congress at the time, through the Senate at the time. So this appointment that needed to be voted on in the Senate, it expired. So it didn't actually take effect at that time. But in this time, while he's serving, he commanded a brigade in General Steele's division of Major General Sherman in Sherman's Corps. So the big battles that Hovey and the 33rd are largely attributed to is first the Battle of Cotton Plant, July 7th. July 7th, 1862. This was considered a victory. It was a small skirmish, but it was considered a victory. Then there is the larger battle that Hovey actually has been credited with, the Battle of Arkansas Post in January of 1863. What makes this battle so significant in Civil War history is that it is connected to the larger Vicksburg campaign, Vicksburg, Mississippi. Even though this happened in Arkansas, this is credited with that campaign, 6 months, give or take, and a little bit on, a little bit off, a little bit on, a little bit off. So the Battle of Arkansas Post was really a skirmish, a series of skirmishes for over 2 days, but its big victory was the taking of Fort Hindman, which is what Hovey was attributed to, and why later in life he was brevetted a major general. But this is his thing that he is most credited for, was taking that fort. So at that battle, Hovey is wounded. Hovey is wounded pretty badly. In fact, Hovey gets shot in both arms. And look, this is musket fire. This is some pretty damaging wounds that someone takes. You don't just get a little hole and walk away. He gets it, as I understand it, although I've read different accounts. So he took it in one shoulder, took it in both shoulders, took it in an arm. He got shot. He got shot a couple of times at the Battle of Arkansas Post, but he continued fighting with musket wounds in his arms. By May of 1863, however, so this happens January of 1863. By that early summer, by May, the injury and he contracted malaria. So injury and illness forced him to resign his commission, much to his chagrin. But he had to resign the commission because he was pretty ill. He was pretty sick. He does go back to Bloomington, back to his house in Bloomington. This is where he convalesced for a good long time, and he's, as I can't say for 100%, but many accounts have him being there, still convalescing a year later for the birth of his son, when he was there for the birth of his son, which I guess the timing would work out. So he was there for the birth of his son. He was later promoted to Major General in 1865. Of course, the war was at its end by that point, but he was, quote unquote, awarded this for gallant and meritorious conduct in battle, particularly at Arkansas Post, January 11th, 1863. So that is the fight to secure and eventually gain control of Fort Hindman. So here you see Hovey's tombstone. I love this tombstone, this picture of this tombstone. I took this photo. I'm very proud to say that I took that photo. I didn't have any photos of Hovey's headstone when I first started at the archives, and I so happened to go to a conference a few years later for Society of American Archivists. They regularly, every 4 or 5 years, hold conference in Washington, D.C. So I went to DC and I said, you know what, I'm taking the day off. I'm going to go visit Hovey's grave. And he is at Arlington. He is in, I believe, section 1. So the very first section, which is why that headstone looks the way that it does, because this is a privately purchased headstone. So the headstone is there. I brought a piece of Old Main with me. I brought a piece of brick and I put the brick on his headstone. So I kind of reunited him with his old friend. So after the Battle of Arkansas Post and he recovers from his injuries in Bloomington, he does eventually head out to DC. He goes to DC because he wants to be a pensions lawyer. He saw the mistreatment that these war veterans were receiving, and they were not receiving their pensions. And so that law degree that he got at Dartmouth, he decided to put to use, and he became a very successful lawyer. So he continued to study and practice law. The war really hindered his health for the rest of his life. He had his instance of malaria really caused him a lot of physical damage, and he had bouts of sort of this recurrent malaria. It wasn't malaria necessarily, but he had this sort of recurrent issues that kept coming up because of this malaria infection. He did come back to Illinois State Normal for the 40th anniversary. He was here, it was celebrated, it was in 1897. However, he was here for the summer, but he got sick again. And he ended up staying for several months before he could be well enough to take the long travel back to DC. But very likely the travel to DC probably made it even worse. And a few months later, he died in November 17th, 1897. So like I said, he's buried in Arlington. And if you can't really read the headstone, but I'm going to tell you what it says. So etched into the headstone at Arlington, it says, Charles Edward Hovey, 1827 to 1897, founder and first president, Illinois State Normal University, private and colonel, 33rd Illinois Volunteer Infantry Regiment, Brigadier General and Brevet Major General, USV, member of Bar Supreme Court, US, Education, Arms, Law, his wife, Harriet F. Spofford, 1834 to 1916. So a little Illinois State representation happening up in Arlington. If you ever find yourself that way, you can easily find them on Arlington's map and visit a president. So I also just want to take a couple of minutes to kind of talk about the legacy of Hovey. What is his legacy? Well, we use his story. We have his swords. I'm going to show you some swords very quickly here in a minute. We have his Civil War swords, plural. And we use his story, and we use his portrait that we see here. We use this portrait that we had restored last year to tell the story of the university across multiple disciplines. This isn't just history. This isn't just anthropology. This isn't just political science. We're able to inject this story into multiple disciplines across campus, and not only sort of spread the message of what we do, but how important archives is for our communities at large. So the portrait that you're looking at here, we're honestly still not sure if this is a portrait that was created when he was president of Illinois State, if this is a portrait created when he was a Peoria superintendent, or if this was just, something that he had done privately. I suspect presidential portrait, but I can't be for sure. We'd really hoped that when we had this conserved, we had a very generous donor give us a large chunk of money to have this portrait restored. It had holes in it. It was really bad. We got it back last year, and I'd hoped to get some more information with it being pulled out of its frame, and we did not. So, so the answers are there are no answers. So we also had a donation of swords from his wife Harriet in 1913. We use those swords today. I've even used them in ROTC graduation ceremonies, and there's a reverence there to that I really enjoy. I come from a Navy family, in fact, so I do take a deep heart in that. And again, we use these stories to kind of further our mission of education, of archives, of our university history. And since we're coming up on some time here, I just want to show you some swords. So we have two swords. This is Hovey's, his battle sword. That's what I like to call it. It's his battle sword. And before you nerd out on me and say, April, that's not a sword, that's a saber. I know, it's a saber. I've had students at Festival ISU. I like to get these out and let students hold these, actually. They get them and they get really jazzed, and they're like, that's a saber. And okay, that's great. So I can't tell you it's a saber. We also have its sheath. We have the original leather sheath. Really, frankly, not much preservation has been done at all, except last year we did have it cleaned, or not the sheath, we had the sword cleaned. In large part, I'm a big believer of, if you hold history, you're part of history. And this connects students and community members to the history of Illinois State. So I'm one of the few archivists out there that's all about you holding the sword. I can tell you that the sword is made from German steel that was imported into the United States around the time at the start of the Civil War. That leather handle there, very likely made of shark skin. I can also tell you that it was made by a company in Philadelphia. I'm looking at a different screen. I believe it's like Hortman and Sons. So they were the most popular company at the time to create swords. You didn't get assigned a sword when you joined the war effort. You either were given a sword privately, or you bought the sword yourself. And he likely bought the sword himself, probably mail order when he got it. And here's some engraving on the sword. So you can just imagine him sitting on horseback as he's battling to take over the fort at Arkansas Post. And this is the sword that's up in the air, charging on. He also has had a ceremonial sword. So here is the ceremonial sword, very much a sword. This one I don't know as much about, but I do have the sheath for this one as well. It's a very ornate sword, again, likely purchased after the war, and he would have used this riding on horseback through town. going to dinners when he had to wear a military dress uniform, grandma's Sunday dinner, who knows. This would have been the fancy sword that he would have worn. Here's the handle. It's a pearl handle that you can see there. And here is the etching on the sword. So I'm happy to send this bibliography. We're recording this as well, so if you want to go back, I do have some links here that link out, especially if you want to know more about their house. Old Illinois Houses by John Drury is very interesting. But I always call out, say, Helen Marshall, Dr. Harper. These are folks that wrote extensively about the university history that has just kind of led us to where we are today in our understanding of university history. So I don't have to do that. That work's not being done 2 and 3 times over. And here's my information. If you have any questions, please email us at archives@ilstu. I'm always happy to give tours of the university archives. Don't think you can't come out to us and not get a tour. You just got to schedule it with me. I'm also happy to entertain research requests, any questions you may have about Illinois State University history. Please let me know, and that's what I'm here to do. So that's it. I haven't looked at chat. So if you have questions, please feel free to shout them out or pop them in chat. I'll leave it up for just a second. So you guys can write down the email address if you'd like. I'm going to scroll through chat real quick. Hey, Luann. Luann, how you doing, Luann? It's good to see you. You lived at 202 West Hovey, really? Oh, that's super cool. I love that.
My mom, she lived there.
Oh, your mom.
Yeah, during
that,
the Depression.
Is that, have you like dug into Ancestry and pulled up the census records and saw where she lived? Or you just know, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so cool. That's so cool. Did any of the people associated with ISNU fight under the Confederate flag? I do get that question. I gotta be honest, I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me. As someone who my mother recently did our ancestry, and she was like, I'm from the South, right? So there's definitely that sort of the Southern pride that's there, which I obviously don't. maybe the good parts of it, what little there is. Oh, April, nobody fought for the Union. And I don't know, Mom, but I found one individual in our family who was a drummer boy for the Union Army. So I always say, you know what, families are complicated. It wouldn't surprise me if anybody fought under the Confederate flag. It was a long time ago, and different ideas and different politics. It wouldn't surprise me. Is the town named for the Normal School? Yes, it is. Good catch, Michael. So the town of Normal was founded after Illinois State Normal University was founded. So in brief, oh gosh, you guys are going to correct me, and that's totally fine because I'm starting to get hot out here on my porch. Town of Normal just celebrated 150, 5 or 6 years ago. So that would put it in the 60s. So I believe it was like maybe 67. Someone can help me out there. So the town of Normal came up around Illinois State Normal University because that's what was happening. Faculty lived in the town. Students were living with faculty, so you could very well be living with your own professor. So lots of boarding houses. We didn't actually have a dormitory until the teens, the 19 teens with Bell Hall. So you had to live in town, but the town did come up around Illinois State Normal University. Carol, the badge that I showed for the normal rifles. So I'll tell you what I do know about it. So the badge is roughly a 2x3 inch badge, and it was made of silk. And I have seen different, of the few that I have, I think one was sewn on like a patch, and then another one was worn sort of like a pin badge. So I think it was just sort of to the discretion of the person who was wearing it. But I'm not a fabric, or actually I know a fabric archivist, and I've brought this to their attention, but COVID waylaid a lot of my research, so I'll bring that back up with her. But I think it just varied by user of the patch. And then you ask, what determines if a manuscript or letters or photos go into your archives versus most special? Oh, that's a good question. Well, so Maureen and I both have collection development policies. So my collection development policy is going to dictate what it is that I take. And what I take are things that are connected to the history of Illinois State. So I'm going to take things like faculty papers for those that taught, for most of their career at Illinois State, the research they did at Illinois State, lectures, because we're an education institution. And not every university archive is going to take faculty papers. I'm actually one of the few that takes faculty papers. So I'll take administrative records. How did a college form? Which, by the way, we didn't have colleges until the 1960s and 1970s. So that's a whole separate presentation. School of Theater and Dance was the Department of Speech for many years before they became what they are in the 1970s. So we're going to take things that have a very direct and or loose connection to the history of Illinois State, whereas Maureen collects in 5 collecting areas, one of which is circus. She does Lincolnalia. We certainly have a good, and I also, McLean County History Museum, hey, shout out y'all. So I'd like to think that between IWU and McLean County History and Maureen and Special Collections, we all have a good conversation, a good open communication. I've certainly given them materials that didn't fit my collection at McLean County History, and they recommend to us when there's things that seem to fit better in our collection, because at the end of the day, it's about access. And we want people to know, if you're thinking, oh, I'm looking for this historical information about Illinois State, you're going to likely think to come to us first. And if someone is thinking, oh, I want history of McLean County, you're going to go to McLean County History. So we want to make this stuff as shareable and open and accessible as much as possible. I got to be honest, Stephanie, I think that's going to be a Bill question. McLean County, was there a Quaker community in Normal in the 1850s? I don't know. Yes. Bill, is Bill on this call? Bill said he was coming to this call. I don't know. I think that's a Bill Kemp question. I mean, were there Quaker families? Yeah, I think there were Quaker families. Was there an active living together, active community? I think that's a bigger Bill question. I don't think I can answer that one for you. Hey, y'all, everybody's welcome. And then Deborah, how many women students were at ISNU? Well, that's a really good question. Don't hold me to this. I don't have the number in front of me right now. First graduating class, I want to say it was a pretty even split, maybe 5 or 6 women out of 12 in that first graduating class. This is a separate, again, I could just do presentations all day. Women did make up a large demographic of our student population in the early years, because it was just kind of this, societally expected kind of thing. Now we get to President David Felmley at the turn of the century, who in his early presidency advocated for removing women from the teaching profession, that this was a male profession and that women deprofessionalized the profession of teaching. And he wrote openly about this. And pardon my French, that pissed off Jean Rose Colby. If you know Jean Rose Colby, she was a faculty member, a very well-respected Colby Hall, Acton Colby Hall. She was the namesake of one of our dormitories here. She did not take kindly to his approach and wrote openly about this in counterpoint to him, and I think was very successful in convincing him otherwise. And saying, no, actually, this is, women absolutely deserve a place at the table, and maybe you should give them a bigger place setting at the table. So I'm a big fan of Jean Rose Colby. I could go on and on about her and her mother. Yeah, I see, yay, Colby Hall, that's right. give the shout out to the Colbys, because they are a fascinating family. How much of my collection is accessible online? Well, Mary, that's a really good question. I'll tell you what, in our last couple of minutes here, I'm going to share my screen one more time, and I'm going to show you, because we actually do have a lot of our collection available online. Let me just log. If you go to, 1 second. Oh no, let me go back. Okay, so let me share my screen. All right. So you are looking at the homepage for Milner Library. So you'll see up at the top, it's library.illinoisstate.edu. That is our homepage. It has recently changed. The look has changed. Some of the navigation has changed. So please pardon me if I get stuck for a second, because I'm still getting used to it. But collections is where you want to go. Excuse me, click on collections. And you'll have a choice between digital collections and physical collections. This, when you're talking about what we have available, just ignore that. Just scroll down to, hey, you notice that sword? Go to the sword. Click on the Dr. Joanne Rayfield Archives. That will take you to our homepage on the library's website, or you could just bookmark library.illinoisstate.edu services archives. Scroll down. So I could go on and on. We have finding aids. These are very fancy inventories, essentially, for our collections that we have available for research. You can come research. We have guides to how to use our materials. If you get hung up and you're like, how do I search for this newspaper? Go to our LibGuide, go to our archives guides. Archives collections. This is what you want. Click on our online collections. And you can scroll down, and we have digitized through various grants over the years. We have digitized all of our course catalogs from 1860, when we first started to print them in 1860, to present. So you can go there. If you want to read the board reports since its founding in 1857 to what we are now with the Board of Trustees of the state of Illinois, you can go there and read all the governance reports. We have all of the yearbooks. This is, look, I'll make show you this real quick because everybody goes gaga for this. Let me just make sure I'm still showing you the screen. Nope, I'm not. Hold on one second. Let me go back. I just realized I'm not showing you that screen. Everybody gets really excited about the yearbooks. There we go. If you are an ISU student and you didn't get a yearbook, or maybe your yearbook was damaged, well, I'm here to tell you we have digitized and made them all available online, and you can keyword search them. So let's go into 1964 briefly. Here we go. We host them, or they are hosted rather, at the Internet Archive. So here's the yearbook. Just click on that edge, just like you're going through a book. I always tell my students, we'd love for you to come to us. We recognize how hard it is to get to us off Northtown Road. But they could sit home, eat a cheeseburger, and flip through the yearbook, and I don't have to worry about them messing up our stuff. So, so they can flip through, but they can also keyword search through these yearbooks. So, there you can see where I have searched for things in the past. I'm just going to put in Smith because that's an easy thing to search for. On my internet connection, we'll see, because I'm also doing a Zoom. So, there we go. So it's going to bring back all the instances on the various pages within the yearbook of Smith. So if I click on this right here, it's going to take me to that page, and I can see that there is someone named Smith for whatever music from the core of our being, whatever this might be. There's probably some sort of glee club. So I can find that keyword within that page. So we've got yearbooks, catalogs, governance. We put almost all of our history books. The books have been written about the history of the university. We've put those online. We have early enrollment ledgers. So if you have family that went to school here from 57 to 1923, you can't keyword search them, but you can certainly flip through those. Photos. I think our big claim to fame right now is that you can keyword search through the Vidette, which is online through 1980. Excuse me, no, this needs to be changed. It is now online through 1990. So you can read the Vidette and keyword search it in all of its glory from 1888 when it was first published to 1990, and then some other materials as well. Let me stop this share. Let's see here. How will hiring your new digital Carol, let me tell you, us angels sang when we got that approval. I am so excited. Donica, her name is Donica Swan. I sing her praises every day. She started last week. I was coming back actually from conference in Canada. I was at the Association of Canadian Archivists in PEI, Canada. And I got back just in time for her first day on Monday, which was weird because we worked on Monday and then had Tuesday off, and then we're back. Donica is going to, where I have not touched hardly at all or made a foundational plan for our digital material, which is growing by leaps and bounds because we aren't doing physical much anymore. Donica is going to be my saving grace. I'm no pressure though, right? No pressure. We're going to do this together. She is a faculty member who has a lot of experience and know-how and skill, and I'm so excited to have her. So, any other questions? Well, look, I am not hearing any and not seeing any in chat. Please, if you would like to email me, archives@ilstu.edu. I am more than happy to answer your questions, arrange a tour, help you with research. That's what we do. Please ask away and I'm happy to help.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, April. I'm so happy you could join us tonight. It was fantastic. I knew when I first met you, I'm like, we got to get her here. She has to do a presentation. So thank you everyone for joining us, for all the great questions, and we'll see you later.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.